Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. I don't know about you guys, but I've leveled 2 characters to 300 herbalism now, and in my many hours playing the game, I've seen a grand total of 1 Black Lotus spawn. Saying that, I don't do too much open world farming, I'm just not the biggest fan of it, but still. And that 1 Black Lotus was on the way to a raid, and it literally just respawned in Burning Steppes, which was pretty fortunate to see. And I know for a fact many people rushed up to level 60 as soon as possible, and then specifically went hardcore into Black Lotus farming to stock them up and get masses of gold for later phases. Even still, I bet people are sitting on piles of Lotus can't believe the amount of gold they're worth now, especially on larger servers. Ever since Blackwing Lure has been announced, prices have steadily been on the rise. I remember for phase 1 they were around 120 gold or so for me, then towards mid phase 2 where loads of people left because of world PvP, they dropped as low as 60 gold. If I wanted to buy a Lotus nowadays, 160 to 180 gold. Of course, flasks are well over 200 gold a pop for any of the flasks that you could want, and as far as I'm aware, 200 gold plus for a flask almost seems to be the norm for many servers these days, which is actually a crazy amount. Imagine paying 2 times the amount you did for your level 40 mount and riding one of the first big achievements you earn in the game for a 2-hour buff. And I'm sure you've all heard you don't need flasks for a raid, and you don't. Imagine farming hours and hours a week to make your raids about 30 minutes faster, but you kinda do want a flask on at least your main tank for Blackwing Lure and other raids to avoid the risks of one-shots. And with phase 4 and zul'gurub coming out, those class trinkets look pretty nice, especially for the druids and priests, and 2 Lotus are needed per 3 summons for the various bosses. Additionally, we still have AQ40 and Nax to come in the future. Many guilds will require flasks for at least the first couple clears to smooth out the learning curve, as we see just how the fights play out on Blizzard servers compared to what people remember from private servers. And at the end of the day, prices are only still going up. This means the demand is still being met by enough people. All of this isn't even considering guilds that require full consumables for each raid, which you may find crazy, but speed clears are like the world first race equivalent for many guilds in Classic, and the buffs that flasks give are so disproportionately high, it's kind of mad. Just as an example, Flask of Supreme Power gives 150 spell power. That could make up for about 20% of a geared caster's spell damage. Distilled Wisdom and Titans give around the same percentage of mana and health too. It's no wonder they maintain such a high price. On top of this, Lotus are just hard to get. Now, initially in Classic, I can find reports that people claim they spawned once per hour. However, it now appears they're between 45 and 75 minutes per spawn. Each Lotus spawns in one of 4 zones. Each zone has its own spawn, they aren't all shared. These zones are all late game ones as well: Winter Spring, Burning Steppes, Eastern Plaguelands, and Silithus. And within these zones there are often about 8 different spawn points, so it's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. Also, they are often in places that are surrounded by mobs, on high terrain, or just generally difficult to get to. And if we say 1 Lotus per zone per hour, that's an average of about 96 Black Lotus possible per day. What's that actually worth though? Say to somebody trying to shift this for cash. As a raw item, it varies in gold value just like it does from server to server. Obviously, you want your Lotus on the highest population servers and those with the more hardcore raiding guilds that require flasks, as they are gold mines to you. On average, it seems the value of a Lotus is between $10 to $13 roughly, and if we count up all of those spawns per day, those little plants are around $1,000 per day to somebody with a bot farm going. Then again, how do you bot something that has multiple respawns over 4 zones? It seems like a very cash intensive startup idea, especially when there is competition from your average player. Then again, 1 Lotus almost fully pays for 1 month of running a bot. For all we know, costs could be covered in a day for dozens of accounts potentially. So how are people taking advantage here? Well, where do I begin? Honestly, I think this comes down to both player mafias as well as bots, though the latter seems to be a bit more impactful. And though we have many players who will happily occupy a zone in hopes of shutting out the market for their server, especially on PvP servers, it's kinda hard to compete with automation that can run 24/7, and we'll talk more about the player side later. Let's check out what are more likely to be the bots now. What's becoming more and more noticeable is level 1s that are on top of Lotus spawns whilst being dead, like little landmarks as for where the Lotuses will spawn. These guys will log in every so often when the spawn timer is up and see whether or not a Lotus has spawned. If it has, the herbalist for the zone will come over and grab that Lotus up. These level 1s will be summoned over to where they're needed by Warlocks, who can summon as early as level 20, then the Herbalist, who will usually be the high 50s or 60, as they will need to be able to defend themselves against mobs in high level zones, will clear out the surrounding mobs, get the level 1 in place, let them die, and then they just log in occasionally and check for the spawns. And as you can see from these waypoints, there are many different spawn locations in each zone. Ideally, you want the Herbalist to either be a Druid, Rogue or a Hunter, as they can stealth or feign death right through to the spawn and have CC to avoid surrounding mobs from tagging them off the Lotus, and then get the respawn timer going as soon as possible, whilst being most likely to avoid competition from normal players. That's pretty much as simple as it gets from the botting part of the operation, and as for finding them live, well, that was proving quite difficult for me. You see, my usual servers, Gehenna, Scholarmag and Pyrewood Village, are all high population, but unlike many other botting operations, these don't take place nearly as frequently on high population servers due to natural competition from players and mafias on these servers. What botters do like are the very low population servers, places like Judgment or Dragonfang on EU. Servers so low population, they don't even show as having 500 active players on Warcraft logs per week, or appearing on Ironforge.pro at all. Now that is a pretty low population. These were the servers that Blizzard offered a transfer to from Firemore as well recently, thanks Blizz. Anyway, places like this, well, there just isn't really any competition, apart from the other people solely farming to cash in, whether it be to transfer themselves to a larger population server, or just for personal gains from selling. Also, you may know there's some restrictions on what you can transfer in terms of value, but this only extends to raw gold. Items like Black Lotus are totally ineffective, despite one stack of them being worth more than double the gold transfer cap of 2,000 on pretty much any given server. Also, a transfer itself is $25, or about 2 Black Lotus. Not exactly a very high barrier to entry to get goods to market on a low level, and even with the 3-month cooldown on transfers taken into account as well. This is how many people are taking hundreds and hundreds of Lotus to market on top servers. But you may think, hang on, I only ever see about half a dozen to a dozen Lotus or of any flasks at one time. Well, sellers only post a few at once. Flood the market and prices will drop. And with our known schedule for content, especially on our later raids like AQ40 or Naxxramas, these are pretty clearly signposted points where flasks will jump to an even higher price than they already are. But on top of the bots, there are also player-driven operations. While some of this stuff is pretty sweaty, hey, at least it's legit. Can't argue with that if that's what people want to do with their time in game. It is a massive amount of effort and upkeep as well, to be fair, so they're getting their reward for their efforts. Players can very much do the same with bots with all the accounts that are dead, but a much easier way to get this done that doesn't require moving half a dozen level 1s to zones or paying for that many accounts is just to have a hunter or shaman use their eagle eye or farsight spells to quickly scan the zone over. Seeing as you can recast both of these spells from where they're originally looking, you can cover massive amounts of terrain by doing this. After that, just have a few guildies that are in the open world gold farming in the area as well who can log in there relatively fast, and you can pretty much have the zone on lockdown. If any PvP kicks off, chances are you have greater numbers in the area and can overpower the other faction. And just to know, I didn't manage to find anything like this online, but I'm actually curious whether using the modern macro functions you could create a set of macros to auto eagle eye on spawn points of Black Lotus. Every item in Classic WoW has an ID number, and add-ons provide a set of coordinates across zones. Between the two, could you instantly eagle eye onto Black Lotus spawns? It certainly sounds like something someone with a big brain could figure out, and no doubt keep to themselves. Mafias aren't exactly something new to the game either. In fact, they were very much anticipated ahead of Classic's launch as just being part of the game, especially the well-known Devil Saw Mafias in Phase 1. Pretty much every single melee class wants the Devil Saw 2 set. It's fantastic pre-raid, and even now it's great starting off at level 60. On release, Mafias started their takeover of Ngoro Crater, but within 2 months, respawn times were reportedly halved, from 10 to 15 minutes down to about 5 to 8 minutes, and the price of Devil Saw leather came down extremely quickly as a result. Even now, the 2 set is only about 120 gold on my servers, which is quite reasonable compared to your several hundred that it was in the early days. And this is an example of Blizzard actively nerfing, or buffing, I guess you could see it either way, a marketplace of limited, high demand resources that have been cornered, except it being cornered by players at this point, not bots. We have 3 to 4 times larger servers than vanilla ever did. We know it, Blizzard knows it. The data available to us also points in this direction, and whilst there aren't necessarily that many times more people wanting to use items created from Lotus, I think there will be far more demand for them than there ever was in vanilla, seeing just how many more hardcore players we have these days. I believe prices of flasks really evidence this as well. There will be people sitting on hundreds of Lotus for AQ and Naxxramas already, and will probably never sell their full supply off to maintain market scarcity and prices. The average player, on average, has to sink so much more time into getting Lotus, and it's a shame because flasking really does improve performance by a huge amount. It feels good being fully buffed and fully consumed up going into a raid, but it's just there for opening weeks or Dark Moon Fur for the majority of players. And whilst I agree that not everything should be easily available for everybody, it's gotten to a pretty bad point now. In TBC, Fel Lotus were found as a rare drop from high level herbs, similar to how arcane crystals work from thorium veins for Classic. We know that Devil Saw Leather, which is somewhat comparable to Lotus, was nerfed already early on during Classic by making spawns more frequent. In any event, as we are at the moment, what do you think flasks will be worth come AQ 40 or Naxxramas? 300 gold? 400 gold at that point? Raid leaders may just say, you know what, I'll take a few more potential wipes for my raid over requiring that kind of gold investment, but for the most hardcore players, they will have the gold no matter what. And on larger servers, there may be 4 or 5 guilds regularly requiring a flask per raid. At the end of the day, though mafias are pretty sweaty, it's legit and it's a lot of effort, so I don't mind it at all. The bots though? 2 recommendations. 1, you can't see herbs whilst dead anymore. This stops the level 1 bots from logging in to check spawns. And 2, improve the list of restrictions on items transferred between servers to include items that can easily exceed the raw gold transfer value on the majority of servers. So things like arcane crystals, Black Lotus, certain amounts of stacks of herbs like Mountain Silver Sage or Plague Bloom as well. The issue is pretty clear, and with ZG out now and AQ being the next big patch on the horizon, will Lotus continue to go up and up, or will Blizzard take any action at all? Let me know what you guys think. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.